This March, the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, in partnership with Richmond's Firehouse Theater, is proud to present War in Pieces for 2024. This annual theater festival features 4 professionally produced one-act plays written by veterans. The co-production has grown out of the Foundation's free veterans writing program, the Mighty Pen Project, a university-level creative writing class and workshop for veterans and their families, taught by me, David L. Robbins, author, professor, and founder of the Mighty Pen. Tickets are available now at firehousetheater.org. Come join us for remarkable stage performances from stories of heroism, sacrifice, and service in uniform.
You can't hurt somebody else without hurting yourself. And you can't kill somebody else without killing a part of yourself.
A soldier in Vietnam walks point with his trained canine, Quirt.
And I sort of became whole again. And I was able to cope and deal. And I was able to sort through the cow and the people and feel for them and just become myself again.
And he reaches for understanding when the enemy destroys a village of innocents and, inexplicably, a cow. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a writing program for veterans and their spouses in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. In this podcast, I'll sit down with Randy Harritan, the author of today's 2 stories, Quirt Alerts and The Field Trip. Randy served in Vietnam in the U.S. Army in 1969. Let's listen to Quirt Alerts, read by Dean Knight.
He sits on his haunches in the middle of the trail, nose held high, bouncing like a fishing bobber, pointing towards the 10 o'clock position. He looks back at Harry but does not move, waiting for orders. Harry's senses go into overdrive. Which way is the wind blowing? How hard? Is anything out of order ahead? A turned leaf, a tuft of grass, an overturned rock? A quick glance encompassing all of his surroundings provides no feedback. The jungle opens ahead of him. It's a perfect place for an ambush. Harry gives Quirt the hand signal to stay. The dog will not move. His orders given, he sits tall and rigid, with an occasional sweep of the area with his nose, analyzing. Having no cover, Harry, as casually as his internal tensions will allow, meanders back to the next man in line. At slightly above a whisper, he says, "Enemy personnel at 10 o'clock. Afraid of springing the ambush, Harry does not look back in the direction indicated by Quirt, but nonchalantly shrugs and looks around the jungle as if taking a break. He can feel the rifle bores pointed in his direction. Silent, deadly, waiting. He wants to flop on his belly and crawl away. His instincts tell him run, but he waits. "Enemy personnel at 10 o'clock, relays back man after man. No ad-libbing, no changing the verbiage. Repeating what is said until the sound dies out along this snake-like string of men stretching along the ridgeline. Waiting. The interminable wait. Beads of sweat run down Harry's back. Pools form in his armpits. Harry hopes the company commander is flanking the VC and will turn the tables, taking the pressure from the front. He isn't sure how long he can maintain the subterfuge. Voices low and mechanical, louder with each new voice, come back up the line. "Move out and engage the enemy." Harry knows that the captain is under orders to engage the enemy, but walking into an ambush? Why doesn't he come up here and engage the enemy? Shit. He turns, recalls Quirt, praises him, and again orders him to search. Quirt will not alert again on these people. He has done his job, at least as far as these people are concerned. Still, it is comforting having him out front. On shaky legs and at a snail's pace, the column moves out, watching, scanning the tree line, moving no faster than necessary. Each step winds the jack in the box, awaiting the monster's release. 100 meters. No one really wants to make contact, but this is the business they're in. The jungle opens in a solid wall of fire. Harry and the others are caught in an ambush along their left flank. The noise is incredible. Heavy machine guns, AK-47s, RPGs, all aimed at the Americans and firing at once. Harry dives away from the guns. The ground slopes downward, providing some protection. Quirt, as trained, takes his place on Harry's left side and lays as close to Harry as he can get, protecting, doing his job. The fighting is vicious. Harry goes through several magazines in a few minutes. Can't stop and conserve ammo. They keep rushing forward. He must continue firing or they will flank the unit on the right. Grass is being cut over his head and falling on him from the enemy fire. They have him bracketed. Boop, ping. Boop, ping. Boop, ping. The grenadier to his left is firing 40mm grenades as fast as he can load them. Thank God for him, helping to keep the enemy at bay. Troops down the line to the left are giving it to Charlie in spades, but they are firing in the same direction as Harry and giving him no cover fire. Chi-Com grenade. It's on Harry's left side, just beyond Quirt. He can almost touch it. It lays there. No ticking, no sound, just a gruesome, inanimate object lying in its own cloud of dust. Time stops. Boom! Quirt takes the full blast. He slams into Harry, and then, almost as if in slow motion, rolls over him. They both are suspended in air. He lands and does not move. Harry comes down with a grunt, a loud whine in his ears. An NVA soldier, a good-looking young man with a fresh haircut and clean green fatigues, walks from the foliage, thinking he's killed Harry and the dog. He wears no hat and is looking over his shoulder, talking to other troops behind him. Harry puts 3 rounds into his chest, and the man falls backwards in a heap, legs akimbo. He's lying there dead no more than 5 feet from Harry. Harry must move. To Harry's amazement, Quirt rises, and on shaky legs assumes his place again on Harry's left side. Time to go. Harry and Quirt move down the mountain, then angle to the left in hopes of linking up the rest of the unit. Harry sees movement and yells, "It's the dog handler," in hope it is his guys and not the enemy. There's no answer. He moves closer and repeats, "It's the dog handler." This time a welcome voice says, "Come on in, we thought you were dead." Harry doesn't know how much time has passed. It seems like hours. The entire unit withdraws. Artillery is called, the big guns, 155s and 8-inchers. The ground rumbles and shakes. Metal shards cut through the trees, cutting them in half as easily as a scythe through hay. Hell has been unleashed upon the VC. Even now, Harry has a certain admiration for the enemy. What brave young men they must be. They know what's coming, yet they attack and endure Armageddon. A baptism of fire and brimstone. Firing stops and the unit moves to mop up. There are pieces of human beings, but no whole bodies. They took them. The rancid smell of cordite. Spent brass. There's plenty of blood and bandages. It's always the same. They try to make the victories hollow. No proof, no bodies. Always an estimation of kills. They killed one of us. It is absolute, not estimated. We have 1 KIA. Shot through the chest. Lying on his back in a pool of sticky red, already congealing, returning to the earth. Some wounded, but not bad. We won. Big fucking deal. We won. A resupply bird comes in and unloads water and ammo. Harry and Quirt hitch a ride back to base camp with the dead man zipped into a body bag. After landing, Harry prods Quirt. He will not move. Can't. He died on the way home. He had no more to give. There are 2 dead soldiers on this helicopter. The shock is instant and severe. Disbelief. It can't be. He was fine. Harry knew something was wrong. He knew. Harry dismounts, cradling a limp Quirt in his arms, and begins to walk with him. His tongue hangs. His eyes are glazed. The crew on the chopper look on with sympathy in their eyes, saying nothing. What can they say? It is more than a mile back to the war dog area. Harry will not stop, will not rest. He pushes on to find Doc, the vet tech. Maybe he can help. It's hard to see through the tears, salty and bitter. Each leaves dirt trails on his cheeks. The heaviness is not in his arms, but his chest. He thinks he will burst open and spill on the dusty, rotten ground. He wants to scream, run, run until the hurt stops, run until all this goes away, but his legs won't let him. They are no longer a part of him, but simply appendages to move him and Quirt over this godforsaken patch of earth. Doc meets him at the kennels, but Harry won't let Doc have Quirt. He slides down and sits against a wall holding him. The crying is over. He talks to Quirt as he always has, thanking him for his protection, his dedication, and love for over a year. Time means nothing to Harry. He has no idea how long he's been there, but eventually relinquishes Quirt to Doc. A wound has opened that will never heal. Harry heads for his hooch, alone for the first time in Vietnam. A short time later, the War Dog Provisional First Sergeant tells Harry that the battalion commander of the unit he had worked with inquired about the soldier named Quirt. He wanted to give him a medal for his heroism during the battle. When informed that the soldier was a large German shepherd, the colonel simply laughed. Dogs were considered to be equipment, nothing more. A month later, Harry receives a letter from one of his dear friends and fellow dog handlers assigned to the 25th Division near Saigon. He says he heard that a dog named Quirt was coming to the main veterinary center near Saigon for a necropsy and immediately knew who it was. There was only one Quirt. He tells Harry that he met him at the landing pad, accompanied his body to the vet, and stayed with him. Both his eardrums were completely gone, which Harry already knows. This happened in an earlier engagement, but had not been reported. Harry had known the Army would retire Quirt for this, so he kept it quiet. Quirt also had severe internal damage. Mortal damage. He was given a proper burial, complete with headstone, in the War Dog Cemetery. Pete said a prayer over Quirt and wants Harry to know he was treated with respect. Another soldier laid to rest. Gone to flowers. Goodbye, Quirt. Serial number 7A97.
I'm joined by Randy Harritan, the author of Quirt. Randy, thanks for showing up, man. That's a tough story. I remember the class, the Mighty Pen Workshop, years ago when we first considered Quirt. And a discussion came up, and you'll recall it. I think it was primarily between you and David Aldrich, who himself had done several tours in Vietnam, about the young Vietnamese soldier in this story that came to investigate after the grenade. And you said that you put several rounds in his chest. And you remarked in the class that you could still see his face. And you remember, Randy, you were challenged by that. People said you don't see him. Do you remember that? And you told
remember
him
very well,
how
yes.
clearly you remembered. And you observed that you, as a soldier, every time you pulled your trigger at another human being, you remembered it intimately.
Yes. And David Aldrich had a saying about that. He said, you can't hurt somebody else without hurting yourself. And you can't kill somebody else without killing a part of yourself. And I thought that was very insightful.
Those memories, here we are many years later, after the war, where are they?
Oh, they're still fresh. Not as much so as before, because I try to move on and live my life and be a good man. I made it through and many others didn't. So I'll try to be a good person and do good by people. But the memories are still there. In my dreams, I'm on my third tour. I only did one tour, but in my dreams, I did another tour. So now when I dream, which is not that often anymore, I'm always on my third tour, which is, I think it's kind of weird.
Maybe. So, Quirt, I have had several people in the Mighty Pen over the years who walked point in Vietnam. Richard Geisel, Aldrich, yourself. You're a breed apart, right? What makes a great point man in a jungle?
Gee, I don't know, because even today, I can't tell direction. I get lost. My wife has to tell me which way to turn and this, that, and the other. But about walking point, somebody said, go that way. And that's the way I went. So I never got lost, but I just went the way they told me to go. You're sort of like a cat. Your senses get very attuned to things happening around you, the direction of the wind, the sounds of the crickets and the birds and the monkeys. They all mean something. And you have to listen to all of that. Plus, this dog is just remarkable that I had out in front of me. So I was very confident in him and never mistrusted him.
You were given Quirt You had him for a year.
Right.
How old was he when you got him?
He was about 4 years old, and he was a green dog. He had no training whatsoever, and I had to take him in training from scratch. I went through 2 cycles with him at Fort Benning in dog training school, and then we flew over together on a C-141. And so we were together from the get-go. A lot of the dogs, they would go through several training cycles with different handlers, but not with Quirt. He was only with me.
How did you end up in the canine corps? I mean,
Oh, my gosh. Well, I went through basic training. Out of basic training, I got 11 Bravo infantry. I thought, oh, my God, I'm going to die. So then I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and they put me in a mortar platoon. So I thought, hey, this is good. I'm going to be back behind the line shooting mortars. Then I get orders for scout dog school, which is strictly point men. So I went to the first sergeant, and I said, First Sergeant, I got orders to scout dog school. He said, yeah, what? I said, well, isn't that voluntary? He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, I didn't volunteer. He said, yeah, you did. So that's how I ended up in scout dogs.
Did you have any special qualifications, or was it random? Or?
Totally random. I guess on test scores or whatever. I don't know how they picked us. But we had some pretty good guys. We had really good guys and really smart guys and guys that could think and act and do. So I'm putting myself in their category.
Yeah. Talk to me a little now, Randy, about life now. A lot of Vietnam vets deal with these memories in a myriad of ways. I know you to be a good man, the man you said you hope to be. I assure you, you are. Talk to us about your life now. And you talk about being on your 3rd tour in your dreams. Your dreams don't happen very much. But I think it's important for the Vietnam veteran generation to tell us not just where they've been, but where they are now, how you've ended up, and what service means to you now.
If I could say anything, I would say I'm over it.
Mm-hmm.
I've left that in the past, and I'm trying to move ahead, and I am moving ahead, not just simply trying, but I am moving ahead. I'm living a wonderful life. I'm happy. I have a wonderful wife. My children are good people. I've just been blessed. There's no question about it. I've been blessed. Ever since seeing that, and in another story I wrote about a burn victim, Vietnam burn victim, that sort of helped me get through trouble and trials and tribulations of combat. And so ever since then, I've been okay.
Now our second story, The Field Trip, also read by Dean Knight. Then I'll talk more with author Randy Harritan.
On Sunday morning, First Lieutenant Hostetler, the company commander, came into the hooch and asked Harry if he'd ride shotgun with him to visit some nuns. Harry and the lieutenant had gotten to know each other and spent time discussing the evils of the world. The lieutenant was Catholic and seemed to know every nun in 2nd Corps. They loaded some supplies, and with the lieutenant driving, Harry with his M16 and a map headed out to find the nuns. After an hour, they reached their destination. This place was poor even by Vietnamese standards. In the middle of a fenced compound, a cinder block building stood in need of repair. A lecherous-looking, bent-over individual loped out, opened the gate, and waved them in. The man didn't speak, but made slurping sounds when he breathed. Drool ran from the corner of his mouth and his cocked head. He was ugly and odious. What kind of place is this? It's a leper colony. The sisters are friends of mine. What? You brought me here with no warning? Haven't lepers died out? Can we catch this stuff? Harry was transported back to biblical times as he looked at these people with this ancient disease. Calm down, Harry. I wouldn't come here if it was contagious. They need our help. They needed help, all right. This place was wretched. The people were gnarled, bent, and obviously had an objection to water. A pigsty with no pigs. The Vietnamese shunned these people and considered them cursed, cast-offs, not wanted in the cities or towns or villages. Even the place given them to live was third-rate, a stinky bog. Jesus embraced the lepers, but Harry could not be so gracious. They did have a cow. She resembled the other inhabitants, a lanky thing with protruding ribs. She was a dowdy gray with long, skinny legs, bulging eyes with no cud to chew. Her udder, however, was huge. Her long, sad face expressed indifference. Harry didn't mingle, but stayed close to the lieutenant. The nuns were in full habit despite the heat. Those black and white outfits tugged up around their necks and the hats pulled low made a clothing sauna. They smelled no better than their charges. Surely God would have understood shorts and a t-shirt in this circumstance. The Mother Superior must have been very devout. Harry was relieved when it was time to go. The trip back was uneventful. The lieutenant told him that the sisters were from his hometown, and he felt a need to help them. Harry admired both the sisters and the lieutenant for caring for these poor, rejected souls. His mother used to say, "There's a lid for every pot," and Harry was glad these good souls existed. But he didn't want to be one of them. A month went by, and the lieutenant asked Harry to accompany him again to the leper colony. This time he said leper colony up front. Harry and the lieutenant loaded the supplies and headed out. This time Harry drove. Once the lieutenant found that Harry had his military driver's license, he insisted on being chauffeured. Harry chuckled that he had been driven around by an officer in the first place. As soon as they arrived at the leper colony, both their hackles went up. Something was wrong. No one came to open the gate. The cow lay on its side, tongue hanging from her mouth to touch the ground. Cautiously, they opened the gate. The smell remained, but added to it was the odor of blood and death. Stillness greeted them. Lifeless bodies were arranged on the ground as only happenstance can do. God's final fuck you to these miserable souls. The pale horse of death traveled silently beside Harry and the lieutenant as they made their way to the main building. Crouched and wary, the two worked their way through the bodies, not stopping to check them. Ugly in life, grotesque in death. Some stared at nothing, and others hid their faces as if ashamed even to have existed. Animals moved in the distance, shaking, daring the two soldiers to do something about the tragedy. They made their way to the block building, where they found the two nuns. Executed. Shot at close range in the head. Some of the blood was still wet. Harry and the officer had missed the murders by only a few minutes. The lieutenant, repining, needed time to gather himself. He had just lost a couple of close friends. Non-combatants. Ladies of God. Senseless murder committed in a rage that led to the unthinkable. Harry stood guard at the door, wondering why the flower of American youth was asked to fight and die for these people. This was not an enemy target. It was most certainly done by the compound's neighbors. A message was delivered here, but no message stronger than intolerance. The trip back to base camp was long and quiet. Harry's heart ached for the lieutenant. He was hurting. They drove in the stillness of death. Harry's only thought was, why did they have to kill the cow? In January 1970, Harry returned to the States and tried to assimilate into normal life. On the outside, he was the guy he'd always been. Loving, carefree, easy to smile, the first with a joke, but inside he had turned rock hard. His heart was a lump of coal, hard and black, with sharpened edges that cut and sliced into his soul. He was alone, desperate. His wife allowed no talk about the war. She held a position that she had it rough too while he was gone. They attended couples therapy, but Vietnam wasn't mentioned. He had 2 beautiful children, a great job, in-laws whom he adored. Life was as good as it was supposed to be. Harry's mother-in-law was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1984 and died within 6 months. This beautiful woman wasted away and left them. He was sad and knew he'd miss her, but couldn't bring himself to tears. His attitude surprised everyone, especially Harry. He wasn't rude or uncaring, but simply accepted the situation. This wasn't normal, but what was? At the Chesterfield County Fair in 1986, with his wife, kids, and brother-in-law Bobby, a crowd gathered around a misshapen, badly burned man on stage. He was an injured Vietnam vet whom the nurses called a crispy critter, a burn victim. His lips had been reconstructed, and his ears and nose were mostly missing. Yet he was full of life and presented his harrowing story with energy and humor. Afterwards, he invited all Vietnam veterans to join him on stage. Harry said absolutely not. He had been ridiculed enough and wasn't about to get on stage for another round of humiliation. Bobby, Harry's brother-in-law, literally pushed him to the foot of the stairs, encouraging him to go. Reluctantly, he ascended the stairs along with a half-dozen other vets. The little burn victim looked at the row of men and, with a big smile, said, "Welcome home. Thank you for your service." The crowd erupted with cheers and applause. All the veterans were taken aback. A mountain of a man, about 6'4" and 250 pounds, sat on Harry's left and cried like a baby. This surprised Harry until he realized that he too was crying. It was the first time any of them had been welcomed home, thanked for their service. Harry cried more that night, for himself and all those innocent, trusting, and needy human beings 2 decades before, even the cow, all snuffed out in a senseless act of war and ignorance. Harry could now grieve and begin his healing.
I'm back with Randy Harritan, author of The Field Trip. Randy, before we get into the meat of the story, you don't make this a first-person narrative. You make this a third-person narrative. You call your character Harry. Your last name's Harritan, it's understood. But I remember the conversations with you about finding a way into these stories. They're clearly powerful tales and powerful memories. Walk the audience through the decision to distance yourself from saying I in the writing of these stories and going with the third person, calling the character Harry. What doors did that open for you?
Well, my first couple of stories were non-Army stories, and I wrote those in the first person, and I could do that just fine. When I tried to write some of my military experiences, I just couldn't get past me, and I thought, how can I do this? I gotta, because the other guys were doing it, and I felt like such a wimp because I couldn't do it. And so my best friend over there who got wounded and sent home called me Harry. We called each other by our last names, and he was from Michigan and couldn't say Harritan. but he was a good guy. And so I decided to take on the nom de guerre of Harry, and the stories flowed a lot easier because it seemed as though I was in an outer-body experience talking about somebody else other than myself.
The insights in both of these stories, I'd say all of the Mighty Penn stories are just so moving and powerful. And I remember our conversations in class and outside class about the cow, how it bothered you that they'd shot the cow, as if the cow represented the ultimate in innocence, almost as much or more than the lepers. But I remember how upset you were that they had shot a cow.
I could relate to the cow.
I didn't mean to laugh. I'm sorry.
I couldn't relate to those human beings that had been given such a poor life, and they were just snuffed out for just being. The cow was the epitome of that. He was just being. Unbeknownst to me, I embraced the cow and did not embrace the people until after I had an awakening with this Vietnam guy that was a burn victim.
What was it like being welcomed home for the first time? I know that you said in the story you began to be able to grieve, but that was from 1969 to in the 80s. That was a long time to carry the burden of not feeling welcome home from your service.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, I was drinking a lot.
Mm.
In fact, I had a drinking problem, as it were. I couldn't go to sleep unless I was drinking. And I would drink to the point of making myself go to sleep, because then I didn't have to think. I could just go to sleep. And it seemed like all of that went away once I was at that state fair, and this man reached out and touched my soul, and I sort of became whole again. And I was able to cope and deal. And I was able to sort through the cow and the people and feel for them and just become myself again.
Yeah, well, I know you to be a good man, Randy, and I'm glad you're yourself. And thank you for coming in, brother.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. The Mighty Penn Project is a free writing program for military veterans offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Penn or sign up for one of our writing classes on Zoom, or just send us your thoughts. Email us at mpodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you want to read today's stories and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. And if you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by David L. Robbins. If you'd like to support the Mighty Pen, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It's an honor.